Welcome back, everyone, to more NASCAR Heat 2 coverage here at Knee Gaming. Today's video is all about New Hampshire Motor Speedway. New Hampshire is essentially a slightly larger version of a short track. While it is a little over a mile in length, you can really think of it more like a larger version of the paperclip. So, with that in mind, we're going to be talking about all three of the series, the trucks, Xfinity, and the Cup cars, all three who thankfully race at this wonderful track. And we're going to talk about the track. We're going to talk a little bit about lap times, and we're going to spend a lot of time talking about the setup and driving style related to this track. And then we're going to finish up this video with some gameplay footage of a 21 lap race in the Cup cars against the 105 strength AI. So without further ado, let's head to the track. All right, now that we're at the track, let's take a few moments before we get into lap times and setup discussions. Let's talk a little bit about the track itself. I mentioned in the introduction that this is essentially a larger version of the paperclip or Martinsville Speedway. And that's the way I approach it. So a lot of the things that you heard me say in the Martinsville video and short track videos in general, you're going to hear the same things over and over in this video as well. And that is because they all work. This is the way that I approach these tracks, and these tracks all have some similar characteristics, even if they're not exactly the same. So the way I drive this track and the way I consequently set up my car is to be smooth in and off the corners. Now, what does that mean? Well, you've got some braking markers at the end of the straightaways. I generally will brake at around the number one marker. So you've got the markers will start at 4, then it goes to 3, 2, and then finally 1. Now you can drive it in deeper than that. That's not to say that, the 1 marker is absolutely the deepest you can drive it into the corner. Not at all. I drive it into the corner to about the 1 because that enables me to be smooth on the brakes without having to really pound on them and risk getting the car out of balance, either very loose or very tight. So I'm smooth on the brakes, then I release the brakes smoothly, and the whole time I'm balancing that with the amount of throttle input that I'm giving. So I'm modulating the throttle the entire time, and that is because of the way I drive most everywhere, and I like to drive the car with the throttle more than anything else. So I don't jump on the brakes all at one time. I don't jump out of the throttle all at one time, just the same way I don't jump in the throttle all at once. So you got to keep that in mind. Because if that's not the way you drive, then you're going to have some issues with this setup, just like you would with any other setup. For the same reason that if you drive by being extremely hard on the brakes, sort of going from 0 to 100 all at one time, and then the same thing with the gas as well, then I would have trouble with your setup because I drive differently. So keep that in mind. You always have to tune the setup based on how you drive the car or truck. So let's talk briefly about lap times. I didn't spend a whole lot of time even paying much attention to the lap times for the same reason that I didn't at Martinsville and some other short tracks. And it's because here it is all about feel. I know that if I get the feel I want, then the lap times will take care of themselves. And in fact, that is exactly what's happened. The AI are nowhere close. In fact, in the gameplay footage, it's kind of funny that I started, I think, somewhere around 11th in the race, and yet I was basically in the lead by the end of the first lap. It's not even close how much faster you are than the AI at this particular track. So the trucks, fastest lap I ran was somewhere around the mid 31 second bracket, somewhere around 31.4, 31.5, in that range. Anywhere in that range, you're going to be way faster than the AI. The Xfinity cars, around a 30.7, 30.6, somewhere again in that range. And then finally in the Cup car, around a 29.6, 29.7 will put you miles and miles ahead of the AI on speed. So if you're anywhere close to that, then you're going to be way ahead of the AI on speed. Let's talk a little bit more about the track. There's a few things that I do want to point out that I have done with the setup. I could have been a little bit more aggressive with this setup, but I chose not to be. And again, it all comes down to feel. I had what I wanted, even though I'm pretty sure I could get probably a few more tenths of speed out of the setup, but I had the feel, and I wanted something that I could run lap after lap while not having to worry about the car jumping sideways or getting extremely tight on me in the corners. Also, I needed to make sure that I could run anywhere from the very bottom groove, which has virtually no banking in it, all the way up to the third or even fourth groove up in that gray area mid corner. I needed to make sure I could run any of those. And that's because whenever you get to traffic, particularly if they're running side by side, I may have to go to the extreme bottom or the extreme top. And I needed to make sure I had a setup that was going to be stable no matter where I went. So that's what you're looking at here. It's possible to get some more speed out of this, I'm sure, but I had the exact feel I was looking for. And the major things I'm looking for is, number one, on corner entry, when I get on the brakes, the car doesn't break loose with me and it doesn't get extremely tight. Second thing is, when I get mid corner, I need the car to really rotate while maintaining speed. Now, it's one thing to get the car to rotate, but if you have to slam on the brakes and basically bring the car to a stop to do it, that's no good. One of the things you'll notice in the gameplay footage is how much quicker I am in the center of the corner than the AI. The center of the corner is where you're going to make or break your passes. If you're quicker than the guy in front of you through the center of the corner, you put your car in the right spot, you're going to beat him down the next straightaway and make the pass. And then finally, the third part is the exit of the corner. Whenever I get back to the throttle, I want to be able to get back to the throttle hard, and I want to be able to stay in it on corner exit. Any of this sound familiar, like maybe Martinsville? Because that's exactly the way I approach this, and it's really worked out well. And the setup that we're going to talk about is a direct result of that approach to the track. So you notice that as we start to talk about setups, we're already in the Cup car. And the reason for that is I used the same setup in all three of the cars with a few differences here and there that we're going to talk about as we move to them. First and foremost, the shocks. There's plenty you can do with the shocks here at this track. I simply didn't need to. The car was behaving beautifully, and rather than continually spending more and more time trying to find a tenth or two here or there, it just really didn't matter to me. I was already so much faster than the AI. No need to mess with the shocks, so they're 10s across the board. The weight settings. Left weight, as always on the ovals, it is 51.2%, which is maxed out. Nose weight or front weight is at 50.5. And the reason for that is because I wanted a little bit of stability. Remember, stability is huge whenever you have a track where you're heavy on the brakes. So I wanted some stability at 50.5%, but of course, you can feel free to reduce that number and it will help the car rotate even more in case that's what you're looking for. Wedge is at my normal 51.0 just for the feel. Again, if you want the car to rotate better, particularly in the center of the corner, then you can reduce that number as well. If the car is over rotating to you, then this is one of the things you can increase to try to help that out. Not the best idea though, because we're going to get to the best idea for that here in just a second. Front and rear ride heights, both at the minimums, no need to mess with those. Spring settings, front springs, 1,100 and 1,200 pounds respectively. And once again, that big 1,200 pound right front spring gives me a lot to lean on, particularly on corner entry and through the center without having to worry about getting really loose. Then 1,100 pounds in the left front just to help the car to rotate. I always want to make sure I don't get it too tight on entry because then I lose all my speed in the center of the corner. Moving to the rear of the car, 200 pounds of rear spring split using 300 in the left rear, 500 in the right rear. This worked out very well. I tuned this based on how the car feels when I get back to the throttle. If I get back to the throttle and the car is very squirrely loose on me, then I know I need to get the left rear and right rear springs closer together, reduce that rear spring split. So if you find yourself driving the car and it does not feel it all the way I've just described it before we got into this discussion, then one of the first things you probably want to do is either increase the left rear spring and or decrease the right rear spring. Bring those two rear springs closer together and the car should feel better, particularly in the center of the corner and off if you're getting too loose. On the other side of things, the flip side, if you are feeling too tight, then one of the things you can do is try either reducing the left rear spring or increasing the right rear spring. And that should help you out. The tire settings, I tuned the tires to be roughly at proper inflation, meaning that the middle of the tire is in between the inside and outside of the tire. It's not perfect by a long shot, but you notice that there's 6 pounds of split in the front tires and only 4 pounds in the rear tires. And that is because we use the left rear tire quite heavily. While the right side pressures for both tires are the same, the left sides, I had a couple of more pounds in the left rear because we use the left rear so heavily from the center of the corner off to maintain traction. There's more force there, so I needed more air pressure to adjust to that. But again, if you're having trouble with the car rotating, one of the things you can do is try lowering both of the left sides to try to get more stagger in the tires or more difference between the left and right side tire pressures. If you are too loose, then one of the things you can try to do is to decrease the difference between the left and right side tires, or you might try increasing the right side pressures if, once again, you are too loose. Now, if you are too loose, say on exit, then one of the things you can do is you have really a couple of options. You can increase the left rear tire pressure and or decrease the right rear tire pressure. Either of those should help you out, but that's more for in-race adjustments when you're on pit lane. If you are looking for a better adjustment during practice, then I would definitely go with the spring adjustments, because spring adjustments will give you bigger changes than the tire pressure unless you make huge tire pressure adjustments. Moving over to the miscellaneous settings, left front camber is maxed out at plus 10 degrees. This simply helps the car to rotate, particularly on entry and then through the center of the corner. Right front camber is at -5, and this is really to suit how hard you like to brake on corner entry. The harder you like to brake on corner entry, and the more in general that you rely on the brakes, the less right front camber you're probably going to want to run, because the more camber, the less grip you're going to have under heavy braking in general. Of course, it all depends on lots of things in the setup, but in general, if you're getting really loose and you find that you're not getting the grip you need under heavy braking, then one of the things to try is to simply decrease the negative camber that you have and get it closer to maybe -1, -2, somewhere in that range. Moving on to the front sway bar, it is at 1.15 inches, which again is a fairly low number. The maximum is around 2 inches here. In reality, they use a lot larger than that in some cases, up north of 2.5 or bigger. But in the game, I believe the maximum is somewhere around 2 inches. What that does is adds a lot of stability and tightness to the car overall. So if you find that overall the car is just too twitchy for you, one of the first things that I would recommend doing is increase that front sway bar. Just be aware that it's going to make the car harder to turn. So if you get too tight, come back off of that just a little bit. Not using the rear sway bar, so we'll move on to the track bar. This is one of the adjustments and differences I've made between Trucks, Xfinity, and the Cup. In the Cup, you can see that it's 10 inches on the left, 11 inches on the right. On both the Trucks and the Xfinity cars, it is 1 inch higher on both sides. So 11 inches on the left, 12 inches on the right. Somewhere in that neighborhood. And the reason I run a higher number on the Trucks and Xfinity cars is because they don't quite have the horsepower that the Cup cars do. So I can run a little bit looser setup with them and still get the same feel and rotation out of the car. The Cup cars have lots of torque in the engine, so you don't need near as much track bar, or if you use too much track bar, you'll end up getting the rear end loose, particularly on exit of the corner. Brake bias is going to be something that is personal preference to a large degree. If you use a lot of brake and you're really heavy on the brake, you're probably going to need to increase the brake bias. 75% works really well for me because I want to make sure I don't get loose under heavy braking. And while I don't use tons of brake normally at this track, I have to set it up thinking ahead to when I'm in traffic, I might need to drive it in a little bit deeper into the corner and use a lot more brake and brake a lot later into the corner. So 75% worked really well there, kept me from getting loose under heavy braking, so it was perfect for me. Grill tape at 45%. I actually think I backed off of that just a little bit. I normally don't touch the default, but I had noticed as I was flipping through the screens and testing that the temperature was up somewhere around 220, 222 or so, and I wanted to make sure that I didn't get anywhere close to 230 because this setting really doesn't get anything for you anyway, like it should. So no sense in pressing my luck. So I backed off just one click there to 45%. But in general, leaving the grill tape at default is perfectly fine. Wheel lock is at 10 degrees, and steering offset, you notice, is a little bit lower than normal. The reason I did that is because I wanted a little bit more pull to the left on the straightaway. So if you really want the car to go straighter on the straights, then you'll want to increase this back to what I would normally use of 0.1, or maybe even a touch higher than that, to try to straighten it out some and have the car drive a little bit straighter on the straights. But for me, I wanted a little bit more pull to the left, so that's why I lowered it a couple of notches. Moving down to the gear settings, this is the other spot where my setup differs between the Trucks, Xfinity, and Cup. Now you notice here we're running, I didn't mess with the first through fourth ratios, even though they need some adjustment. It is terrible. In fact, in the gameplay footage coming up, you'll notice that whenever we start the race, my first gear, even before I get control of the car, my first gear is already showing over 9,000 RPMs. So immediately whenever the race starts, I have to shift into second, and then pretty much immediately into third. So if anything, you really need to lower first and second gear. And by lower, I mean actually lower the numbers from 3.5 in first down to somewhere probably around 3.3, 3.2, somewhere in that range, just to get you started, and then see how it goes from there. Same thing with second gear. Third gear probably could use coming down a little bit more as well. And then finally, fourth gear is at 1.0, which is where it would normally be. The rear end ratio of 4.11 is what I use in both the Cup and Xfinity. That gets you up close to 9,000 RPMs at the end of the straightaway, but not really that much over, if memory serves me correctly. In the Trucks, however, I use a 4.22 gear because I'm not going quite as fast, and I need a little bit more gear for the RPM to raise my RPM some to get up closer to that 9,000. So the moral of the story there is you still have some room with the gear. If you wanted to increase this from 411 and go up to 422 and see what that did for you, you probably run out of gear and really and hit the rev limiter. But give it a shot. Just beware that it's going to change the handling of the car and probably make the car looser. The same thing if you decide to go down from 411 to something like 4.0. That would probably make the car tighter because you're going to be running lower RPMs. So something to keep in mind, and is an easy adjustment that you can make if you're not really sure what else to change on the setup for a particular loose or tight condition. So hopefully that helps you out by some discussion there on the Trucks, Xfinity, and the Cup cars. Now stay tuned for the gameplay footage. Again, a 21-lap race against the 105 level AI here at New Hampshire. Thank you very much for joining me, and stay tuned for more NASCAR Heat 2 coverage here at New Pit Gaming.
another car out there. Clear. Time to go. Easy, easy. Clear low. Inside still there. All clear. All clear. Clear up top. Clear high. Still the top. Easy, easy. All clear now. Hold your line. Two to go. All clear. Low, low. Clear quick. One to go. Yeah, you got it. Inside still there.